So let's go through the sympathetic nervous system now, and you're going to see a lot of opposites here from the parasympathetic. Parasympathetic was rest and digest. Well, sympathetic is fight or flight. Fight or flight, so think of things like exercise, excitement, emergency, embarrassment, where you either have to maybe defend yourself, or you're running or any type of energy, embarrassment. So when we're dealing with cardiovascular organs like the heart and lungs, well, the sympathetic division is now going to increase the rate of them, where the digestive organs are going to be inhibited by the sympathetic division. For example, your sympathetic division is not going to care about digestion if you're in an emergency situation. It's going to take that energy and shunt it to your heart and to your lungs and to your muscles to either, well, fight or flight, any of these E-word situations. You might recall the parasympathetic division was also called the craniosacral division, and we explained why. Well, the sympathetic division of the ANS is also referred to as the thoracolumbar division because of the nerves that are used. No cranial nerves, all spinal nerves. Well, which spinal nerves? T1 all the way to L2. Remember, there's 12 thoracic spinal nerves, pairs of spinal nerves. Well, those all 12 thoracic plus the first 2 lumbar spinal nerves are your sympathetic or thoracolumbar division. Now, these are preganglionic neurons. They will synapse at a ganglia, which we're going to get through. One large one is called the sympathetic chain ganglia. Sometimes it's called the sympathetic trunk ganglia, or this whole thing, or sometimes you just call it the sympathetic chain. How fibers get onto that chain, which will be easier to see when we get to the picture, are through a white ramus and a gray ramus. Collectively they're called rami communicantes, so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Once we get to the pictures, we'll be able to see that a lot clearer. So here's our sympathetic division. How do we know? Well, let's look at the nerves used, in this case T1 all the way to L2. That's why we also call the sympathetic division the thoracolumbar division. In dark green, you see the preganglionic neurons. In light green, you see the postganglionic neurons. Where does the synapse occur? Well, at ganglia. So we can see a lot of synapses happen in this big chain, which actually is on either side of the spine. Well, we only need to look at one here, though. This is the sympathetic trunk ganglia or the sympathetic chain ganglia. A lot of synapses occur in here. Now, you can see some preganglionic neurons pass through the chain without synapsing. See how we stay dark green here? And in this case, we synapse at other ganglia. These other ganglia each have names, but collectively we call them, doesn't say it here, but you'll see it on another slide when we get there. These are called collateral ganglia. So some preganglionic neurons go through the chain because they synapse at these collateral ganglia, and then you'll see they turn light green here. So in the sympathetic nervous system, our preganglionic neurons are usually shorter than our postganglionic neurons, which is opposite of the parasympathetic division. And if you look at the organs here, we can see that, well, it doesn't actually say that, but things like the heart and lungs will be stimulated by the sympathetic division, fight or flight, but things like our digestive organs will be inhibited by the sympathetic division because digestion is not important in times of stress or excitement or activity, and which is just the opposite of the parasympathetic division. So good things to know here. Sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight, is the thoracolumbar division because spinal nerves T1 to L2 are used. Where do synapses occur? Either at the sympathetic chain ganglia or at the collateral ganglia. And also, if neurons or preganglionic neurons pass through the chain without synapsing, like this one and this one, these 3 dark green lines here, these are called splanchnic nerves. Each splanchnic nerve has a specific name, but generally they're called splanchnic nerves, and splanchnic nerves are nerves that synapse at collateral ganglia. So you can see 1, 2, 3 there. One last important point about the sympathetic division, which we'll explain on upcoming slides as well, is that you might notice this one preganglionic neuron that goes all the way to this one little organ on top of the kidney called the adrenal medulla, and you can see it stays dark green. It passes through the chain without synapsing, it passes through collateral ganglia without synapsing, and it goes all the way to this adrenal medulla. So there's an exception of the 2-neuron chain. The neuron going to, good to know, the adrenal medulla is just a 1-neuron pathway to get to that organ. Every other organ of the body is a 2-neuron chain when you're dealing with the ANS, whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic. The only organ, adrenal medulla, that receives innervation from just a single neuron is in the sympathetic division. So the adrenal medulla in the sympathetic division is just 1 neuron to get there. We'll explain why on an upcoming slide. This picture is just showing us the sympathetic chain ganglia. You can see that it's lying on the one side of the vertebra, right? You can see the nerve roots here, the ventral root, the dorsal root. There's the dorsal root ganglia, which becomes the spinal nerve. We saw that in a previous chapter. And the reason why this is here, why I put this picture on here, is to kind of reinforce some terminology that we saw in the slideshow before, and we see it in lab, is, well, how does these axons, how do they get to the sympathetic chain? Well, if you look right here, you see a white little connection and a gray connection. The white is myelinated, that's why it's white. The gray is unmyelinated, that's why it's gray. And those are called rami. So you got a white ramus and a gray ramus, and those are just on-ramps and off-ramps. The white ramus sends axons onto the sympathetic chain, where the gray ramus is the way off. So when you see those those terms, those structures, white ramus and gray ramus, or collectively they're called rami communicantes, they're just on-ramps and off-ramps to the sympathetic chain ganglion.